Hi everybody, and welcome to the iRock Knits podcast. My name is Corey Eichelberger, and I'm coming to you today from a little bit of sunshine in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where the quarantine is making me irritable, but I'm doing my best to keep my chin up. So hopefully you are all doing the same. I am going to start today with a little tip about knitting during quarantine.
During the quarantine, it's important to get outside in your backyards every day and enjoy some of your favorite activities. For some of us, it's a little bit more difficult than others.
If you did not see that on Instagram yesterday, I hope it made you laugh. My husband was an unwilling participant in the videotaping of my crazy, but the dog loved it because he loves the cold and he loves snow. So I was mad yesterday when I woke up to blowing sideways snow. So I thought, what are you going to do about it, Corey? Are you going to just try to keep a positive attitude, or are you going to hunker down and be grumpy all day? So I texted my daughter and I said, I think I'm going to go knit outside in the snow. And she's like, of course you are, Mom. I said, don't you think it'll be funny? She goes, well, you'll think it will be funny. That's a 23-year-old for you, right? Hey, I want to start today with a little bit of a giveaway that happened a couple of episodes ago from the Bags by Awesome Granny. Chris won one of those bags and asked him if he would prefer to have one of Matt's bags because Matt's bags are really cool and most guys would probably rather carry a plaid masculine shirt bag. So I have an extra Bags by Awesome Granny that I needed to give away for that giveaway, and so I did a drawing this morning, and this is the bag that I had that was not sent out to Chris. And Amy Schultz, you won the bag, and I know Amy, she has done test knitting for me, and so Amy, I think I have your address. I will put that in the mail to you. So surprise. I just wanted to get that done right away here so I wouldn't forget. If you were kind of watching your YouTube notifications, then you might have seen a podcast chat time come up from Amber and I last Tuesday. Monday afternoon, we recorded about an hour on Zoom. It wasn't the best. I have intermittent internet. You all know that. I really struggle with internet in my neighborhood being stable and secure, and we are hopefully getting a new internet company that's coming to town that's digging new lines, and so it's just going to be a while, and so we're kind of putting up with all of that, and so the recording was a little glitchy. But if you did not see that, then you can go out and watch that on my YouTube channel, and I think Amber has put it up on her channel as well. And the reason that you might not have seen it is if you don't click the little notifications button on YouTube. So if you would subscribe to this podcast and click on the notifications or give me a thumbs up, I would really appreciate it, because that's how you find out that I have different content up, and that's where I will put out any notifications of what might be happening in the iRock Knits podcast world. So I have a tip or trick in addition today. I was talking about double pointed needles with someone the other day, and they don't like using double pointed needles because they get ladders when they move around in a circle and move from one needle to the next. And I guess I don't know that this is a tip that everyone would naturally use, but the way that I originally started kind of switching that up was to take my needles and knit one stitch past the join of the needle each time. So I would, let's say I have 10 knitting stitches on each needle. I would knit my 10, and then I would set my needle down because the needle would become clear, and then I would knit one more stitch. And then I would pick the needle back up and knit one more stitch past. And so instead of getting a space where you are always constantly carrying a thread between needles where they kind of, would come together, you're moving that, you're rotating it around. I guess it would be kind of considered maybe a form of helical knitting where you're always going one past. But when I started doing that, or if I'm kind of struggling because I'm just not pulling that stitch quite tight enough, it goes away. And I was knitting on some sleeves on a sweater this weekend, and I thought, oh, that's a tip that I could share with people if you have ladders and you don't like ladders on your double pointed needle knitting. So I wanted to just chat a little bit today. I want to just put it out there that I am not a knitting expert. We have talked about this before. I certainly know that there are hundreds and hundreds of knitters out there who are better knitters or more experienced knitters or have more knowledge in knitting than I do. Some of you seem to think that I have the answers to all things. I do not. And I had a kind of a, light bulb moment this weekend when I was knitting on the Ursa sweater that I cast on, which is a chunky weight V-neck sweater, raglan sleeves with a half brioche stitch and a little decorative triangle in the front of brioche stitches. And I have ripped it back several times. And it isn't because I'm not capable of knitting the pattern. It's that I know how to make my sweaters fit better because I've knit so many. And as I'm knitting someone else's pattern, I will say, this would work better for me if. And so I will just rip it back and redo it. Now, I did make a mistake the other day. There is also a center back half brioche stitch detail that's really pretty, and you're doing increases for your raglan, so you have stitch markers. So you have 4 stitch markers where your raglan's shaping would go, and then you have one in the back. And so you have an increase round, and I increased on that back stitch, and I got many inches further before I realized that there was an extra little jog of one extra stitch on either side of that center back. And I looked at it and I thought, well, that stinks. But it's a common error for me to get a little distracted or to make a mistake. And I often will have just a second of conversation in my head where I will say, oh, I'm just going to leave it, because I can be that person where it's not going to bother me. This is not something where a knit 2 together to take those two stitches away would have helped. It was still going to be very visible in chunky yarn that there was a, increase on either side of that. And so I ripped it back and I just did it again, because you will never regret ripping back, ever. I've never come across a person who has said, oh, I ripped it back and I'm so bummed. I'm so mad at myself that I ripped it back. That doesn't happen, right? The ripping back takes a moment of your time, and the reknitting takes a little bit longer. But you have corrected something that was possibly going to bother you. And so I'm going to add that as one of my mantras for the podcast, along with waddle on and green bananas. You'll never regret ripping back, because you won't. And so I often will set things aside. If you watched the works in progress video that Amber and I did, I set things aside when I come to a dilemma, something that I feel like I might need to change, or I want to work on, or I'm not really sure about what the next instruction should be or what it should look like. I will set it aside, and I really mull on things. So yesterday, when I knew that this podcast was going to happen today, I went and looked to see what the sweater of the day and the shawl of the day were going to be for today, so that I could mull on it, think about it, go to sleep thinking about it, as well as dream about it, because that's where I find clarity, is thinking about things over time. It takes me a long time usually to design a pattern, and I do a lot of thinking on the fly, because that's how my brain processes. It's just to kind of think about things over and over again. When I'm out for my walk this morning, I was like, oh, I should think about what I'm going to talk about that sweater today. Again, is there anything else that I want to add? And that is also true of the way that I knit. So I'm kind of a slow, methodical plodder. I will often sit with my knitting in my lap thinking about something, and that's what's happening to me with this Ursa sweater. Last night I put my sleeve in the arm, or put my arm in the sleeve hole, and I was like, it's too tight. I'm not gonna like it. I'm gonna want to wear something underneath this. It wasn't too tight. It was too tight. There's a difference for me. It needed a couple of extra stitches. I had knit down 3/4 of the sleeve. And last night I ripped it all the way back up and said, I'm going to be unhappy. There was a time that I thought for a moment, maybe I should wet it and see how much, but I stretched it, and I don't want to stretch it to make it bigger. So I had to kind of think about it. And I said to my husband at supper last night, I ripped back a whole sleeve on my sweater this afternoon. It just gets so frustrating when you're not making forward progress. And he said to me, you seem to be more verbal about knitting problems and mistakes and ripping back than you are verbal about the good part of knitting. And I thought, that's an interesting thought. And I do think it's because I'm constantly thinking of ways to improve, or to try to make it better, or how it's going to fit me better, or what would be better for my shoulders and my bust. And that all just comes with 30 years of knitting. But I have never pushed myself to become a knitter that has knit all of the intricate, detailed, beautiful knitting that I see some knitters knit, giant, beautiful, small needled lace shawls with beads that are tiny. Like, I've done one and then I move on. I have never been that person that really has developed that love of the fine intricacies of knitting. I'm knitting on a chunky sweater and I'm super happy that it's getting off the needles quickly. But I just wanted to kind of put that out there, that I am not your expert in all things knitting. I also want to comment on the fact that I had 128 comments on the podcast from 2 weeks ago, and I will read everybody's names at the end. But my comments are about 100% positive that I get from people on this podcast. And that is saying something to all of you who watch and want to respond in a positive way to the time and energy that I put into this podcast. I rarely, if ever, get a negative comment on the podcast. And maybe that's because I'm opinionated and strong-willed, and people are afraid that I might call them out, because I might. But I don't get a lot of negative, gripey, this was terrible kind of stuff. I occasionally get a bot that is like a male name that is a little inappropriate, and then I just delete those. But those are computer generated somewhere. It's not someone that's literally writing me something, weird. Like, for a while there, when I first started the podcast, I got one every time that said, will you knit me a nice red turtleneck? Over and over, every week. Right? So I don't know who that person was. I assume it was a computer. But I just want to say that right now, we're all staying home. We are not going places. We might be feeling a little bit of stress and mental health rear its ugly head. And there are opportunities for you to go out and take out your frustration on people who are putting out free content. And I am proud that you guys don't do that. I think I'm going on, 3,500 subscribers on this channel, and I have the good people. I have the nice people. I have the people who think twice and say, how would this make her feel if I said this? Because you know what? If you don't like it, just turn it off. Move on. There's so many others out there. No one is being rude or mean to me. And last week, and several of you laughed at this, Amber and I said, if you don't like it, don't tell us. because we don't need to know. If any of you at any time in your life think that you're not doing your best, right? Am I doing my best at this? Absolutely. So why would I need someone to tell me that they don't like it or they don't appreciate what I'm doing? Because I'm doing my best. So I just want to thank everybody, because I said to Amber, I rarely even get, a lot of thumbs down from people. And I think that's great. Just move on. You don't have to thumbs down me to let me know that you didn't like it and you're not going to watch anymore. Just go about your merry way. You got hundreds of other podcasts to watch, which leads me to, let's talk about a few more podcasts this week, okay? I have a couple. Needles at the Ready with Kevin. I have watched 2 of his podcasts in the last couple weeks. I have a whole list of people that I've never watched that I need to catch up on. Tanis Fiber Arts, they are back podcasting more regularly because they're home now, and that's a husband and wife team who have a yarn dyeing business and a number of small children. So I don't know, and they do the dyeing business full time, so I'm not sure how they have time to. And then Sharon and her husband on the Knit Style podcast. I have watched them for several years, and Sharon gave me a tip on a YouTube comment thing that I went and checked, and I did have it toggled. So thank you for that, Sharon. And then a new one to me was Shantie Knits, Chantie, and she is a newer podcaster. She got 3 or 4. I'm trying to remember, my brain too. And then last night I watched another Knitting Posse podcast. That's with Kate and Kim and Laura and Laureen. And I really like them. They're doing Zoom, 4 people on a Zoom, and they're really good at not interrupting one another, at not jumping on top of what the other person has to say. So Amber and I need to work on that. I think we will do a Zoom again. I podcast every other Monday. I record, and it takes me all day. So I get up in the morning, I go for my walk with Cody, I come home, I eat my breakfast, and then I set up my dining room, and it's not always set up like this, which means I'll take a picture of it today and put it in at the end if I remember. I have to pull my dining room table apart and put a tripod clamp on a stool from the kitchen. And then that clamp holds the iPad, and then I have lights that used to sit on the table but now sit farther away because I was getting kind of blown out and some crazy shadows. So I have to set up the lights, and then I have to move everything back off the table and lay out the stuff that I'm gonna do. Then I have to bring 2 boxes in. Today there's only 1, but 2 plastic big boxes to hold my mannequins up higher, because if they sit on the floor, you would not be able to see them. So I have to haul those in and set those up, and then get my chair. Then I have to get out my little remote clicker, because I take a picture each week of me waving, saying hello, to put it up on my YouTube channel. So I have to make sure that I get that picture taken, and sometimes I have to take multiple of those, because the camera will go to video instead of photograph, and so I have to fix that. Then I go in and sit down at the computer, and I print out the patterns for what I'm going to talk about that day, and then I print out the books that I'm going to talk about. I print out, right now I'm printing out the recipe that I'm going to talk about, and then I sit with my iPad on the computer and I type in all the people who have made comments so that I can say hello to everyone. And so I look through those comments one more time and type in all those hellos. Then I'll usually go and take my shower, start getting ready, and I'm thinking about the order of how I'm going to do the podcast. So it is currently 1:33, and I have not had lunch. And I just started podcasting, about 5 minutes ago, because I had to get out. I had to crawl up in the bins, because this is a summer shawl for me. I had to crawl up in the bins and get it down. And then I had to decide if I was going to wear a different sweater or wear the sweater that I was talking about today. Then I had to get out I've got 2 other items over here to show on the podcast. I had to draw Amy Schultz's name for the bag, and I have about 14 pieces of paper. These are my notes that I have taken over the last week. of things that I need to remember to talk about on the podcast. So then I lay those all out and I organize those, and then I get started. And then once I start recording, it usually takes me about 3 or 4 sections that I have to do, because I usually stop it in between to get it. And then I have to figure out, okay, did I overtalk? How much do I have to edit down? And then I sit down and I start editing, which means I watch the whole podcast through and I take out any big sections where Cody has barked, or I have coughed, or I've had to take a drink of water, although I sprayed my mouth the last 2 times with my Biotine spray, moisturizing spray, because I've talked about that before, but I take a medication that gives me dry mouth, so I will often smack something, and so I will hear it, and then I'll re-record what I've just said, because I don't want you guys to all have to listen to that, and I'm loud enough anyway with the microphone. So that has been working really well. I have this mouth. I used to mouth spray stuff. I always used to drink it at night before I went to bed, because I would have such dry mouth in the night. I have to drink water all night. And so that has been helping quite a bit, me not have to stop. But then I edit the whole thing. I watch it all the way through. Then when I get done, I add the music, and I've added the little section highlights throughout the whole thing. And then is when I finally get to start uploading the podcast. It's gotten much better since we got the new cable in the neighborhood. Last week when I uploaded Amber and I's podcast, I think it took 25 minutes total. Granted, it was midnight when I started, because I try to wait a little bit until things have settled down in my neighborhood and people might be trying to go to bed. I'm not a tech person. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but it used to seem like it would go faster late at night, and so I usually don't start it until late at night. So usually the podcast will go up sometime before midnight. Occasionally I run over into the early morning hours, and that happens every other Monday. All that to say, that was not Corey's stories for today. That was not my plan. You guys, I'm alone in the house every day because my husband is still going into work, and I can't go anywhere, and it's just me and the dog, and I need to talk more. So I have a number of Zooms going each week with different groups of people, with people that I've taught before, and I just need to chat more because I'm doing a lot of television watching, and then my husband comes home and I'm like, yeah, because, you know, I get my energy from people. So I just had to ramble on about that, apparently. Okay, let's move on. The Up North Cal is still going on in the Ravelry group and on Instagram. You can knit the hat or the mittens or the socks or the cowl. The pattern should be out any day. We finished it this weekend. I have one more person looking it over, maybe 2 more friends that are just kind of looking it over. The last 2 patterns I published had errors in them after they went to publication. People found typos, and so now I'm gun shy. And it's not a problem because you can do an update for people, but I really try hard to make sure that there aren't any mistakes in a pattern. And I have read it, and my tech editor has gone over it, and then we've gone back and forth, and then I've had test editors go over it. And sometimes, because I think I write really long patterns, it's just a lot to keep really clear and fresh. So the cowl pattern should be up any moment now, and if you have not gone to my website, iRockKnits.com, and subscribed, put your name into the subscription box, you might want to do that because sometimes, always, there's a coupon code for new patterns for those people. So just a hint. I don't send out a weekly newsletter usually. I don't have a lot of information that I'm garnering. I'm not gonna, send you a bunch of spam. If you're gonna get something from me, it's gonna be because you're gonna wanna get it. Okay, so that's the Up North Cal, and the hashtag for that is Up North KAL. So hashtag it. I really want to see if you make a project of mine and you post it on Ravelry or Instagram. Will you please tag me in the notes below so that I can see it? I really would appreciate being able to see if you would like to do that for me. I took a picture this morning of a pair of mittens on my phone that someone knit, and they're darling. Look at how cute those are. That's my up north cabin mittens with scrap yarn, and she changed yarn every 4 rows, which meant she had a lot of ends to weave in unless she used that tip from last week. But I just thought that was really, really, really cute, so I wanted to take a picture of that and share it. And that was M's Little Nest on Ravelry who knit those mittens. So go out and give her a little love button on those, if you will. Let's do the audiobooks and the real live book of the week this week, because I have one of each. So my book club met via Zoom last Monday, and I went out to get the book on Audible and read it or find it at the library, and it was not available in audio form. So this is a book that I had to download as a Kindle, in the Kindle format. It was called News of the World, a novel by Paulette Giles. Here's the cover. That's what it looks like. And in the aftermath of the Civil War, an aging itinerant newsreader agrees to transport a young captive of the Kiowa back to her people in this exquisitely rendered, morally complex, multi-layered novel of historical fiction. Captain Jefferson Kyle Kidd travels through northern Texas, giving live readings from newspapers to paying audiences hungry for news of the world. An elderly widower who has lived through 3 wars and fought in 2 of them, the captain enjoys his rootless, solitary existence. In Wichita Falls, he is offered $50 gold piece to deliver a young orphan to her relatives in San Antonio. And 4 years earlier, a band of Kiowa raiders killed Joanna's parents and sisters, sparing the little girl. They raised her as one of their own. Recently rescued by the U.S. Army, the 10-year-old has once again been torn away from the only home she knows. This is a extremely short book. I think it's like 220 pages. It said it was going to take me about 4 hours to read it on my Kindle. It took way less than that. It's a really nice story. Paulette Giles did a lot of research on children who had been kidnapped by Indians and raised as Indians, and then tried to go back to their families, and the difficulties and they always wanted to go back to the Indians after they had been, rescued. It was really interesting. The story was very good. The characters were fully fleshed out. She's an excellent writer. Her language is almost poetic, prosaic. She just the verbiage is wonderful. I would highly recommend News of the World. I think I gave it 5 stars. I liked the pace of it. It read really quickly, and it is not coming out until August, I think, on Audible. However, it is coming out as a major motion picture, and they have tentatively hired Tom Hanks to play the part of Captain Kidd. So I would highly recommend News of the World. And the other book that I finished this week, I finished this morning after I got home from my walk. I thought, I'm going to delay the podcast by a few minutes and finish this up. The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, a novel by Rachel Joyce. Here is what the cover looks like. It was 9 hours and 57 minutes. I started it late last week and just couldn't stop listening. Meet Harold Fry, recently retired. He lives in a small English village with his wife Maureen, who seems irritated by almost everything he does, even down to how he butters his toast. Little differentiates one day from. Then one morning the mail arrives, and within the stack of minutiae is a letter addressed to Harold in a shaky scrawl from a woman he hasn't seen or heard from in 20 years. Harold pens a quick reply card and, leaving Maureen to her shores, heads to the corner mailbox. But then, as happens in the very best works of fiction, Harold has a chance encounter when it convinces him that he must absolutely deliver his message to the Queenie in person. and thus begins the unlikely pilgrimage at the heart of Rachel Joyce's remarkable debut. It's her first novel. Harold Fry is determined to walk 600 miles from Kingsbridge to the hospice in Berwick-upon-Tweed because he believes as long as he walks, Queenie will live. This was such a good story. I just loved it. 5, 5, 5. It's sad. It's depressing to think about. They have a really unhappy marriage at the time. I think most people who have been married many years have gone through a time where they just weren't in sync or weren't on the same page or were arguing more than usual or were, not loving the other person as much as they had once loved them. And then that kind of can cycle back around and you can, work through it and go back to being the people that you maybe originally were, or you've both grown and changed so much. I just loved his thought process while he does this pilgrimage and he goes on this walk. He is out of shape. He does not have the gear for it. He doesn't take his cell phone. He doesn't have a backpack. He just sets out walking. And you know that he's going through this inner struggle, turmoil. You just root for him the whole way. And there are some twists and turns. I really liked it. So, highly recommend 2 books this week, one that I read and one that I listened to. So I would say I will go put those on the list. I always list all the books I talk about at the beginning of the thread in audiobooks that you would recommend. So if you have something to recommend to me, go out to the Ravelry group and place it there, or send me an email at Corey@iRockKnits.com so I can know. I have a huge list going on currently. All right, let's talk about the shawl of the week, shall we? This is Mayura, Mayura, by Crystal Rose. That's how you spell it. And there it is in all its glory. And here's mine. Okay, this came out in May of 2014. 23 stitches and 32 rows to 4 inches in garter stitch. The whole thing is garter. It is done on a US size 4 knitting needle and it takes 770 to 1,000 yards. It says peacocks are magnificent and the inspiration for this shawl. Peacocks are prevalent in mythology and stories can be found in most any culture where the bird resides. Short rowed metered squares are used to represent the eyes in the tail. These purposely placed mitered squares can show off your most gorgeous color changing yarn. This shawl may be knit all in garter stitch or partially in stockinette. There are 2 sizes written, but is easily adjustable to any desired length. The pattern called for fingering weight, but can easily be adapted to other weights, and any weight larger than worsted may prove cumbersome. It might get a little too big. Okay, she used 320 yards of the main color and 450 yards of the contrast color for the medium, and 450 of main color and 500 for the large. So I did the smaller version, and that's why I think mine definitely turned out a little bit smaller. This was just a really interesting take because you've got these mitered squares in here. And when I saw this, I love orange and green together, or orange and blue, bright blue together. And now it looks a little Nemo to me every time I see it. But I wanted to know how those mitered squares worked, how the short rows occurred in this particular pattern. It is a little bit smaller. It does have a kind of a nice decorative edge here. I ran out of yarn and had to use a different skein, so you can kind of tell that my skein right along the bottom was different. I don't think if I'd have not pointed it out, you would have noticed, but I didn't have quite enough yarn for that. But otherwise, it's a really cute little shawl. I've been thinking about closing it with some cording and just running it through the edges here and using some blue to close it up in the front so it would be more like a poncho and just throw over my shoulder, because I do wear this one more in the summer, and so I didn't have it out for my winter shawls. But I do remember thinking in the fall that I wanted to do some type of closure on it that would be permanent, so that I could make it a little more wearable for me, as opposed to just flopping over the shoulders and then not staying on as I move around. So that's Mayura. I found the construction to be very interesting on this one. So if you are looking to kind of challenge yourself to do something that's not just a plain garter stitch shawl, this might be right up your alley. Let's talk about the Scottish Primrose. This is the sweater I'm wearing today. It's by Lauren Smith. Came out again in May of 2014. It is 23 stitches and 30 rows and 4 inches. It's knit on a US size 3 or 4 knitting needle. There are 6 sizes. It goes from a size 32 to a 49.5 inch bust. We're going to talk about the lack of sizing and why that occurred in this pattern. Oh, I need to tell you that I made my sweater long sleeved, and in the original it was short sleeved. So here is the short sleeved, and then a 3/4 length option, the short sleeved sweater. Okay, Scottish Primrose. So now the details. This pretty sleeveless sweater has a traditional Fair Isle flower motif on the yoke and is seamlessly knit from the top down, so you can make sure it fits to your liking as you knit. The raglan construction creates a flattering boat neck, and an I-cord cast off adds interest to the neckline and sleeve edges. Gauge is important. Make sure to choose a needle size which will give you correct gauge. Okay, here is the issue with this sweater. I love, and I don't think you're going to be able to tell, but this yarn that I used is Sweet Georgia, this blue, and it is super tonal. It's got a ton of shine to it, and these blue flowers just glow. So I highly recommend that Sweet Georgia yarn that I used. That it just really, there's just a lot of high and low. When you design a sweater that has a motif on it, the sizing can be really challenging because you have to be able to fit 5 full flowers across the top, or 6 or 8 or round, or however many. And so if you're going to choose to do a motif that is a raglan, you have to have a break in the motif. So can you see what happened right here? There's almost a full flower here and not quite a full flower here, and then you get the diagonal line from the raglan. And the same thing over here. There is one spot on the back shoulder, and I'll try to take a picture of it and put it in here, where the motif does line up and goes from one big flower to one big flower. But on all the sizes, you're going to get this half a flower issue, which folds into where your arm is, but it is something that bothered me on the pattern. If this would have been done as a yoked sweater without the raglan, and the increases would have happened in between the flowers, you could have probably gotten full motifs around on most of the sizes, but not on all of the sizes. And that's the same issue I would have if I decided to write my word sweater that I wore to Rhinebeck. I couldn't do it for all sizes because you'd have to go up by a full word, because you wouldn't want knit, 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 without the T on it all the way around, right? You would want to have a full motif. You have to know going in that that could be an issue, and that you would not have a full motif unless you wanted to stop one pattern and put a bunch of plain stitches there and then start the next pattern. When I wear it now, it doesn't bother me at all. Second thing with this sweater, have you ever knit a pattern where you are second guessing the designer the entire time? as a newer knitwear designer, I have done this more times than I care to say. Number one, when you think there's a mistake in the pattern and you look at it and look at it and look at it and you know the designer is wrong and then you figure it out and you're the one that's wrong, right? That can happen. Other issue that you can have is that you can think of a better way to do it, whereas I would have preferred not to have the raglan and have, spread these out over a yoke so that perhaps you wouldn't have that line there. But not a huge deal. I also like to think of what are better ways to do things. And in this case, I really questioned what was going on for the neckline. It was not getting any smaller. And I had this big neckline and I hadn't started doing the decreases. And it really concerned me that it was going to be way too big. And I kept, oh my gosh, I need to fix this. I need to fix this. It's got to be wrong. You go to the projects, no one says anything, and you're like, why? What's going on here? Smart designer. So she has an I-cord edge right here along there, and all of the little gathers that happened right here are really feminine and wonderful because nothing happened between here and here. And it wasn't until I got to that point that I understood that it was actually a feature of the pattern because I didn't know. Okay, I'm looking through my bifocals again, sorry, but that's how I can see what I'm pointing at here. But yeah, so it's really a pretty neckline. I really like the little gather. It's a little more feminine. It does really look nice right there. You can kind of see that it happens. And then I did my neckline as she had shown in a coordinating color. Okay, so that was called for in the pattern. It's a really nice little pattern. It's plain all the way down. I wear this all the time. It doesn't have too much wear on it. I was really glad I made it long sleeved. If the flowers didn't have the thing right here, I would have knit this again in short sleeved. But then I was like, oh, that really did bother me while I was knitting it, that it was kind of a pain to do that. So it kind of depends on, what your aesthetic is or whether or not that would bother you or not bother you for whether I can actually recommend it. But she recommends Drops Alpaca by Garn Studio in sport weight to knit this. And I think I knitted in like a heavy fingering sport in Luette Gems yarn. I'm pretty sure that's what I knitted in. I really, really like this sweater. It has held up really well and was a fun one to knit. All right, I have a recipe for you guys this week. I just made this last week. It is one of my favorite things to make. It is a lot more, takes a lot more energy to make this one than last week's. A lot of you really liked last week's recipe and you went out and made it. So I started a recipe thread in the Ravelry group and I put the recipe right in it so you can go out there and copy it or print it off, whatever you want to do. But it was just dump everything in the crock pot and serve it up, right? This one is a little more intense in the amount of time it takes to prepare it, but I love it. So this is baked sweet and sour chicken and fried rice. Now, not all the recipes that I use are, are gluten-free recipes, but this one does happen to be. And you take boneless chicken breasts and cut them up, and you can use thighs or whatever you want as far as your meat goes. And then you put them in a cornstarch wash and egg. So you take little, pieces, and then you do like the egg and cornstarch wash. And the thing about having cornstarch as the option for this is that you're not using flour, which is what I can't have. So that's how I found this original recipe. And then you put it in a fry pan and you fry it and turn it and fry it and turn it and fry it. And then you put it in a 9x13 pan. So you've got to prep all that. It makes a big 9x13 pan of meat that has all got egg and cornstarch on the outside of it that's fried, okay? And then you pour this sweet and sour sauce over the top of all of it, and you put in the oven at 325 degrees and for an hour, and you turn it every 15 minutes. So you set your timer and you just scoop it and turn it, and that all that sauce, that liquid, goes in with that cornstarch, and it makes like the sweet and sour kind of gravy is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. And then I have a fried rice recipe, which is just to make white or brown rice. And old rice is better. So if you have leftover rice, stir fry is better with old rice. And then you just put in peas and carrots or mushrooms, a little garlic, a couple of eggs that you scramble up, and some soy sauce. And then you serve it with this these baked sweet and sour chicken. Now, you have to like the flavor of that sweet and sour, and you could certainly add like a pineapple to it or a green pepper in with this sweet and sour if you chose to really have it be like that. But you can play with the amount of ingredients in that sauce. So it calls for 3/4 cup of sugar, 4 tablespoons of ketchup, half a cup of distilled white vinegar, so any vinegar, a tablespoon of soy sauce, and a teaspoon of garlic salt, right? So probably things you have on hand in your pantry: sugar, ketchup, vinegar, soy sauce, right? So you're not going to have anything probably that you have to go buy something special. But I reduce the amount of sugar that I use, and you could certainly probably use a sugar substitute, or like a guava or a honey. You could probably do that. I just never have. So I often use reduced sugar ketchup at our house. My husband's not a huge fan, but he knows that I have a bit of a sugar addiction. So I will often use a reduced sugar ketchup. And if you've never seen one of those, you might want to try it sometime. They sell them right in the grocery store. The Heinz and Hunt's both have a reduced sugar ketchup, because ketchup is mostly sugar. That's why they raise us on it, because we eat more when we use ketchup. Anyway, whole nother tangent. A couple of documentaries that I've watched on that. So you just preheat your oven and do your chicken up, and then the reason that I like recipes like this is that I can do it and then it's in the oven for an hour. So I can go sit down and do something else and then just stir it every little while, and I've got kind of an hour of downtime before supper. I don't like, you guys tell me if you agree with this, preparing a big meal, like a meal that takes a little bit of prep. This is not a lot, but it takes a little bit of prep. You've got a couple pans, and then you have to go right into serving it, right? So you're cooking and cooking and cooking. Maybe it takes you 45 minutes to an hour to get it all ready, and then you're serving it immediately, and and you're sitting and you're kind of like exhausted when you get a chance to eat it. Is not as enjoyable to me as when I get to make something and then I just make up that stir fry a little bit ahead of time and hold it warm, and then I have like an hour to go do a couple of other things or sit down and knit a little bit and then eat it. I find the meal more enjoyable. This is just a favorite one of mine, so I will put it in there. And you could definitely put it in the slow cooker and put the chicken in and pour the sauce over and stir it in the slow cooker. That would certainly work. I do it in the oven in the 9x13 pan. And just pour the stuff over and serve it. So I would call it a fairly quick and easy recipe. It just does make kind of a mess when you've got to do the dredge. But if you've never done it before, only use one hand, keep your other hand back, right? So you always have one clean. Okay. The question of the week for anyone who wants to make a comment but doesn't know what to say to me other than like, add a girl Corey in the comments. What is the largest project you've ever knit? I'm working on that blanket right now that I showed on the WHIP podcast last week for Kylie. And that's probably going to turn out to be one of the bigger things I've ever knit. But I'm going to take so this is going to be really hard for me to show, but I'm going to do my best to show it to all of you. This is going to be the biggest project. So I'm going to answer that question today. The biggest project that I've ever knit is my Great American Afghan, and then sewn together. So it's really big, hard to show here, and I knocked my camera. It has an edge on it that's really pretty. See that edge stitch there? Here's another one. And here's another square. And here's another square. Here's another square. So you can see that I knit all of these and then had them crocheted together by someone else because there's a little seam on the back of them. I wanted to crochet them together, but I didn't want it to do a bad job because I had knit so many pretty squares. And I used Encore yarn, I think. It was just an acrylic, and I wish I would have done it in a woolly wool, but I wasn't. This was many years ago. I wasn't quite as savvy as I am now. I will try to take a picture. All the squares are individually out on my Ravelry pages so that you can see each individual square that I knit. But the center one, the one that I put kind of at the top in the middle, was the one with the sweater. And that was knit, entered into the contest by a friend of mine, and she won the entire contest with this square, which has got the Aran sweater that you knit flat and then sew into your square. And so Susan Rainey won the contest for that sweater in the center of that. There are a couple of other really interesting ones. There's one with a fish and a net. And there's also one with a church and a tree, if I can find it. Here's one with a spider and some branches there and her web, and then it has a little bug in the web. So there were some. Okay, here's the little one with the church and the tree and the sunshine. So it's a giant Afghan. I entered it in the state fair many years ago. I got second or third place, and I tied with someone who knit the same blanket. So it was very common at the time. People were knitting this a lot. If you are sitting at home and not knowing what to knit on, or don't have a lot of knitting mojo right now, just sitting with your knitting in your lap, I would highly recommend knitting on a square blanket, buying a blanket that you did squares, because you will have immediate gratification by finishing up squares rather quickly. There are several building blocks, little booklets that have interesting stitch patterns that aren't quite as intricate as this one, that are really good for beginners. Like if you want to do building blocks, I don't know if it's number one or how they're labeled, but one is like textured stitches and then one is lace stitches, and I've done those together with other people to knit squares together for gifts for baby blankets and that kind of thing. Those are great books. They're called building blocks. I'm sure you can find them just by Googling. And this was called the Great American Afghan Contest. And it came out, each of the squares came out individually. There were 4 in each of 5 Knitters magazines. And then they put it together in a booklet, and you could buy the booklet to make the squares. So if your library has all the old Knitters magazines, you could find all the squares in the magazines. But I will try to take a better picture of it. But if you have a big, huge project and you would like to tell me about it, I would appreciate it. You're the biggest thing you've ever made. I have a bit of information this week on a new product that's coming out that I was asked to join. It is called Pattern Dippity, and it is a new project tracking made simple with you every stitch of the way. Every great project begins with a great pattern. Pattern Dippity makes finding and organizing patterns simple so you can spend more time stitching and less time searching. It allows you to label your collected patterns as you see fit and search for them simply and seamlessly. Your entire pattern collection will always be right at your fingertips. This is the name of the company, Pattern Dippity. And they are going to sell you an iPad-like device where you are going to keep all of your knitting patterns. I was asked to put my patterns on this new device, and I am still investigating how it would work for me. They will sell the patterns on the site, and then it will also be like a pattern reader where you can mark your lines off and you can enlarge things, you can change the font, but it will all be on a separate device. And the devices run anywhere from $200 to $400. And I'm not sure how many people are going to buy into something like that. This is coming out of a company in southeast Wisconsin, and they already have or are doing something with other crafts. So this is like a prototype where they have done it, I think, with either sewing or, I'm not really sure, cross stitch, needlepoint. I don't know. There was something else out on the website, but you can go to the website now and take a look at it. I just wanted to give everybody a heads up that I hadn't heard of it, and sometimes it's nice to be in the know. But Patterndippity, and they're going to have a place. They already have 5,000 patterns on their site. I don't know how they're going to integrate other patterns from other sites, things that you bought in books or magazines, things that you got on Ravelry. I don't know how that interface is all going to work, but they probably have answers for it. So I just thought I would share it with all of you today. Let's wrap up with the hellos at the end of the podcast today. Hello to Janet Robertson, who started a dress when her granddaughter or daughter was 16 and is now 45. And she won the contest for the oldest whip that anybody came and told me about. Although Victoria Pilski thought that she was the winner because she started a outfit or sweater on her granddaughter's 4th birthday, and the granddaughter is now 13. So she thought she had the longest one. But Janet is going to finish that and show us all that dress that she started when someone was 16, and that person's now 45. Courtney Lancaster likes to use the word slacks. Thanks, Courtney. I appreciate it. Judy Muscroft, Kat Montgomery, Laura I say it every time, Wojtkowski, Olivia Mankey, Sherry Gustafson, Denise McDonald, Heather Wilson, Catherine Schendelay. Hi to S.K. Hoyt, Kelly Mathern, who has bees in Virginia that are growing like the wind. I still want to know more about that, Kelly. Kathy Goodman, Lisa Rowe, Tiffany Scharf, Jill Jackson, Cindy Haub, Suzanne Reardon, Laura Lenke, Tammy Samborski. Tammy, the Joss and Main purse tree is back in stock. Remember I showed you guys last week that purse tree to hold your project bags? And a couple of you went out to buy it and it was out of stock, and it is now back in stock on Joss, Joss and Main. That purse tree that was like a metal art thing with hooks on it. Deb Vandermolen, Eileen Tomorrow, who was a hairdresser for many, many years and thinks the hairdressers are now getting all the respect that they deserve as we're all struggling with our bangs and our hair. Julia Burton, Melanie Cahoon, who had parents that met at the soda fountain and got married. And that's what happened to my parents too. My mom was a soda jerk. My dad was the intern pharmacist. Yeah. And Ing-Marie Lindberg, did I say her name correctly? So I'm happy about that. Glenda Bathgate, Amy Mickelson, Christine Thomas. Marty Ide recommends the World Peas podcast. And I went to take a look at it and I started it and I got interrupted. So Marty, I still have to go. It's out of Denver, I think, and it's World, WHIRLED, Peas, PEAS. But it would sound like World Peace. Right? Louise Nauka, Donna Coffey, Danielle Brown in Iowa, who has a twin who is also named Danielle Brown. So when they both comment, I should say their name twice, I thought that was interesting. Ellen S., Peggy Bork, Robin Gasser, Susie Cusey, Linda Gesling, who knits many things that I knit. We knit a lot of the same stuff, and we have for years, Linda. Caitlin Proudfoot, Rachel Weisenstein, Beverly Fouth, Kat Gore, Sandra Boyle, Haida Penny, and Pat Wagner, and Don Colbert, and Karen, and Jesse's Mom 12, and 619-253, and Cheryl Lacemaker, and Michelle of Knit Takes Two, and Amy Blanford, and hi to Kathy B., and Vonda Finazzi, who is going to cut that steek on that Icelandic sweater that you knit many, many years ago when you lived in Iceland. And you're going to show me, because I want to see you cut that steek. Come on, girl. You can do it. And Jennifer Page, and Peg Organ, and Stephanie Haverman, and Jane Taylor, who is the librarian in South Dakota, who is still going into work a little bit, and the rest of her staff is working from home. I know libraries are hard. I have a friend who also works in the library near Chicago, and they're all working from home, and people are frustrated that they can't return their books and stuff, and they're like, we don't want to touch your books right now, right? Hello to Julie Smith, and Am So Crafty, and Tammy Nichols, and Nikki Loeffler, who wants to finish a linen stitch scarf, and I understand the pain of that. Linen stitch is so slow. I probably made 3. They're in my projects on Ravelry. And I gifted one to my neighbor, and I have no idea if she would have appreciated the amount of time that went into a linen stitch scarf. Slip knit, slip knit, slip knit. Yeah. Susan Schwarzenberger and Sharon of Knit Style, thank you for your comment about the YouTube comments. Bonnie Glass and S.K. Hoyt. Carol Lee, Karen Mezzacapo, Angela Jenkins, Dawn Overholt, Michelle Rudy, Mindy S. Plin, and she has a name that she pointed out to me that was a little strange. And then Imagine That Anid, or Anid, who is Heather. Also, Beth Hoskins said hello on Facebook a while back, and Jill Jackson sent me an email. And sometimes I miss to put those down there. So, also, Eileen Tomero, she told me how to say her name too. And so I want to get it right. And I wrote it on a separate sheet of paper, so I'm glad I did. So go out to iRockKnits.com and put your name in, because I have a couple of new patterns coming down the pike. Maybe even before the next podcast, I have to talk to the ladies at Toad Hollow, because we have a new pattern coming out, and it's very exciting for me. And that pattern is all finished, and the sample knitters are finishing knitting it up, and it's going to come out on or around May 1st, maybe sooner. I'm not sure, so we've got to check on that. What else? I'm just looking to make sure I don't forget anything. Oh, I didn't talk about this. Well, some of you hang in here till after the hellos. I knit another one of these Cookie Gate hats. Oh my gosh. This is what I wore in the video out in the snow. This is yarn by the Chelsea Yarns. They have a podcast. That's another podcast that you should all go out and watch. Christina and her husband Tad, Red Bank Mike, are podcasting right now from their home because the yarn store is closed. But she had someone make her these pom-poms for the top of a hat, and I love it. I think it is so great. A little on the pricey side, so you know, if you're on a budget right now, probably not worth your time going into spring and summer. But it came from, it's called, the pom-pom was called Sugar Plum, and it came from Chelsea Yarn, and the person that made it is from Green Goat Ranch, and she made these out of locks and then used some of the yarn in there. I just think it's the cutest thing. And I bought a second one because I gave my first one that I made away to a friend who had a birthday at the end of March who loves pink. And I was like, I'll order one and then I'll gift this one. and then I'll have one. And so then I knit it up really quick. I cast on 60 stitches and worked a hat, so it took no time at all. I could have done a folded brim. I did have enough yarn left over to have folded that brim up, but I wanted it to be done quickly, and so I did do it really quickly. All right, I'm going to leave you today with something I saw on Instagram that I thought was kind of funny. How to measure your yarn for a long tail cast on. Take the number of stitches you want to cast on, multiply by 2.57, divide by your needle diameter in millimeters, add the current date, the dye lot number, and your blood pressure in millimeters of mercury, light purple candles, yell, "I will get it right this time," or "so help me," at the top of your lungs. Start casting on. Too short, right? Long tail cast on joke for all of those of you that are in the know. Okay, until next time, no green bananas, waddle on, keep it colorful, and you'll never regret ripping back. Bye. Love you all. Hang in there. Things are going to get better. Lift up and support one another. Take care. Stay safe. Keep in touch. This is how it looks. The aftermath. Well, it works. Thank you.